The history of rock and roll is often painted in broad, electric strokes. It is a mythology built on the image of the frontman strutting in leather and velvet and the guitar hero worshipping at the altar of the amplifier. We are told that the sound of the 1960s and 70s was born from the friction between the voice and the six-string guitar. We trace the lineage from the blues of the Mississippi Delta to the stadiums of the world through names like Clapton, Hendrix, Page, and Richards. But if you strip away the guitar solos and isolate the tracks, you often find that the true harmonic foundation, the very glue holding these sonic cathedrals together, is not coming from the front of the stage. It is coming from the back, from behind a wall of amplifiers, played by men who are often seen as auxiliary, temporary, or entirely disposable.
He didn't like fussy music, he liked straight ahead things. If he didn't want to play something, he wouldn't play it. If he didn't like how it went, he wouldn't play it. But what he liked and what he played was quite very unique and very admired by a lot of piano players.
They are not in the spotlight, but if you listen closely, you will realise that they are the ones playing the music.
The thing about him was that I don't think the Rolling Stones would ever have got going if it hadn't been for him. He was a great player, he was a great piano player, he was a great guy that got us all together.
Here we are turning the volume up on the quiet ones to celebrate the musicians who were essential to the chemistry of the greatest bands in history. These are the unsung heroes, 5 keyboard players who shaped classic rock. London, the 4th of June, 1968, Olympic Sound Studios. The atmosphere is thick with cigarette smoke and the stale air of creative frustration. The Rolling Stones are attempting to record a new track, a song that began life as a folk ballad titled "The Devil Is My Name." The session is being filmed by the French director Jean-Luc Godard. His footage captures a band in purgatory. The song is sluggish. It drags. Mick Jagger is strumming an acoustic guitar, searching for a pulse that isn't there. The song is dying on the floor. Then a change happens. Keith Richards suggests a samba rhythm, and sitting at the piano is a pale, gaunt figure. He looks more like a librarian than a rock star. This is Nicky Hopkins. Hopkins begins to play. He does not play chords, he plays rhythm. He treats the piano like a percussion instrument, hammering out sharp staccato stabs in the high register. Keith Richards would later call them diamond tiaras, glittering embellishments that cut through the mud of the mix. Suddenly the song transforms. It becomes menacing. It becomes sympathy for the devil. Hopkins' playing drives the track, locking in with the congas, creating a groove that is both primal and sophisticated. Without that piano, the song is a campfire sing-along. With it, it is a masterpiece. Nicky Hopkins was the ultimate hired gun. A classically trained pianist from the London suburb of Perivale, he possessed a touch so delicate and a melodic sense so profound that he became the first call for every major British band of the era.
He had an intuitive feeling of where the piano should sit and where it should be.
It's just another example of having Nicky Hopkins.
He was one of the busiest and most successful session players.
But he was just the gold star session piano player.
But his life was defined by a cruel irony. He suffered from Crohn's disease, a debilitating condition that frequently hospitalized him and made the rigors of touring impossible. While his peers were traveling the world in private jets, Hopkins was often confined to London, tethered to the recording studio by his own fragility. His fingerprints are everywhere. Listen to the Kinks' Sunny Afternoon. That languid, descending piano line that reeks of fading aristocratic glory, that is Nicky Hopkins. Ray Davies, the Kinks songwriter, once marvelled at Hopkins' lack of ego. He noted that Hopkins could slip inside a songwriter's mind and play exactly what was needed, as if he were the author himself.
Nicky can take a simple song and fill it with all kinds of extra meaning and feeling. You can't think of a lot of other people whose riffs just hang in your mind the way Nicky's do.
Or take the Beatles. In 1968, Hopkins found himself at Abbey Road for the recording of the single version of Revolution. The track is a wall of distorted guitars, aggressive and abrasive. But cutting through the noise is an electric piano solo, frantic, nervous, jagged. It is Hopkins, channeling the chaos of a year defined by political assassination and riots. He is not just accompanying the band, he is interpreting the zeitgeist.
I had done studio work from 1965 on, and, was being quite successful at it. All of a sudden I got the chance to work with the Stones. This was a key point for me in my career. The very first session was We Love You, and Paul and John came down to the studio to sing background vocals on that track. This was the first time that I met John, and this led to being invited to play on Revolution. There weren't really any instructions except where they wanted the piano to start. I just played some blues stuff. We did it in one take.
By 1971, rock was changing. The synthesizer was arriving. The Who were recording Who's Next, an album that would pioneer the use of sequencers and backing tracks. Yet Pete Townsend knew that cold technology needed a human heart.
In 1965, I got a call to do a session, which was with Glyn Johns producing, Jimmy Page and Jeff Beck playing. And from that one session, I got to meet Shel Talmy, and I started doing some stuff with the Kinks and some of the Who's stuff.
I had no idea how he was going to fit in, but Nicky's contributions were very different. They were very creative. He was really quite brilliant.
On the track The Song Is Over, Hopkins provides the bridge between the old world and the new. His piano is the connective tissue, softening the hard edges of the synthesizer, grounding the band's bombast in a beautiful, lyrical reality. On Getting in Tune, a song about the struggle to find musical expression, Hopkins' piano is the expression. It starts tentatively and grows into a soaring, confident melody, mirroring the lyrics perfectly. Despite his ubiquity, Hopkins remained a shadow. He released solo albums like The Tin Man Was a Dreamer in 1973, a title that alluded to his own physical fragility. They were critically acclaimed but commercially ignored. The industry did not know how to market a session man. He was a utility, a service, not a star. When he died in 1994 at the age of 50, he left behind a discography that rivals any in history. He was the melodic conscience of the Rolling Stones, the Kinks, and the Who. He was the man who added gold leaf to the granite.
Whatever song you wanted, he could play it. You'd tell him once how the song went, and he would come up with some incredible line very quickly. That's what he did. You played your song, and then he just took it and then just sounded like 10 times better.
If Nicky Hopkins was the virtuoso who could play anything, Ian Stewart was the purist who refused to play almost everything.
He was a great player, he was a great piano player, he was a great guy that got us all together.
In the lore of the Rolling Stones, there is a title that is often tossed around, the Sixth Stone. But in the case of Ian Stewart, known to everyone as Stu, it was literal. He founded the band. He was the first one to respond to Brian Jones's advertisement in Jazz News. He booked the first rehearsals. He drove the van. He was the heart of the group.
Rolling Stones are only here because of Ian Stewart. Without him, the Rolling Stones would never have existed. He hooked with Brian, and then Mick and I sort of waltzed in, and and then suddenly it became the Rolling Stones.
But in May 1963, the band's manager, Andrew Loog Oldham, took a look at the lineup and made a cold calculation. The Beatles were the Fab Four. They were cute, they were marketable. The Rolling Stones needed to be the anti-Beatles, thin, dangerous, and sexually threatening. Ian Stewart was none of those things. He was 6 years older than Mick Jagger. He was burly. He had a prominent jaw and he wore leather golfing trousers. He looked, in Oldham's eyes, like a bricklayer, not a pop star. Oldham fired him. He told the band that 6 was too many for the posters and that Stewart's look didn't fit.
Andrew Oldham was a publicity man, and he was very conscious of producing a Beatle-type pop group, although without actually changing the music too much. I mean, he sort of admitted that he knew nothing about music, but he wanted to cut the group down to 5 people. I mean, I was much older than them. I didn't like long hair. I've never had my hair long. And also, you've got to own up the fact that I'm a rotten piano player.
In one of the most remarkable acts of humility in music history, Stewart accepted the demotion. He agreed to step down as a member but stay on as the road manager and piano player. He drove the gear to the gigs, set it up, and played behind the curtain.
A terrible road manager. He was a piano player that loved music and loved being with the band.
Keith Richards would later say, "I just think of myself as being a guitar player in Ian Stewart's band." Stewart's influence on the Rolling Stones was not just logistical, it was musical dogma. He was a boogie-woogie fanatic. He worshipped the sound of Albert Ammons and Pete Johnson, and he had a rule. He would not play minor chords. He called minor chords Chinese music. To Stu, they were pretentious, unnecessary, and antithetical to the spirit of the blues. When Mick Jagger and Keith Richards wrote Wild Horses or Angie, songs filled with melancholic minor chords, Stewart would simply stand up from the piano stool and walk away. He refused to play them.
He didn't like fussy music, he liked straight ahead things. If he didn't want to play something, he wouldn't play it. If he didn't like how it went, he wouldn't play it. But what he liked and what he played was quite very unique and very admired by a lot of piano players.
This forced the band to bring in other players like Nicky Hopkins for the ballads, but it ensured that when Stu did play, the track swung with a ferocious, authentic barrel house rhythm. Listen to Brown Sugar. Listen to Honky Tonk Women. That driving percussive piano that propels the track forward. That is the sound of Ian Stewart's stubbornness.
She had to heave me right across her shoulder.
He kept the Rolling Stones honest. He stopped them from drifting too far into psychedelic pretension. He was the anchor that kept them tethered to the blues. His reputation extended beyond the Stones. In 1971, Led Zeppelin were recording their 4th album at Headley Grange, a damp, imposing former poorhouse in Hampshire. They were using the Rolling Stones mobile studio, and Stewart came along to check on the equipment. He sat down at an old, out-of-tune upright piano in the lounge. He started hammering out a rhythm. Jimmy Page, Robert Plant and John Bonham joined in. The result was Boogie with Stu. The track is loose, chaotic, and joyous. You can hear the slap-back echo of the hallway. You can hear the mechanical noise of the piano pedals. It sounds like a pub lock-in at 3 a.m. When the album Physical Graffiti was released, the songwriting credits read Page, Plant, Jones, Bonham, Ian Stewart, and Mrs. Valens. The band credited Ritchie Valens' mother, knowing the song leaned heavily on Valens' Ooh My Head, ensuring she received the royalties. But the title immortalised the man at the keys. Ian Stewart died of a heart attack in a doctor's waiting room in December 1985. He was 47 years old. When the Rolling Stones were inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame 4 years later, they requested that Stewart be inducted with them. The request was granted. The Invisible Man was finally on the poster.
I'd like to pay tribute to 2 people who can't be here tonight. One, Ian Stewart, a great friend, a great blues pianist, whose odd but invaluable musical advice kept us on a steady, bluesy course for most of the time.
By January 1969, the Beatles were disintegrating. They had gathered at Twickenham Film Studios to rehearse for a televised concert that would never happen. The sessions were a disaster. The cavernous soundstage was cold and depressing. The cameras documented every argument, every yawn, every moment of simmering resentment.
Well, really, I'm trying to just say, look, lads, the band, you know, should we try it like this, you know?
It's funny that Harry done because when we
it's like, should we play guitar all through Hey Jude? Well, I don't think we should.
Yeah, okay,
you know?
well, I don't mind. I'll play, you know, whatever you want me to play. Or I won't play at all if you don't want me to play. You know, whatever it is that will please you, I'll do it. But I don't think you really know what that one is.
George Harrison, feeling marginalised and patronised by Lennon and McCartney, walked out. He quit the biggest band in the world over lunch. The Beatles were now a trio and even on the brink of extinction. A few days later, Harrison returned, but he brought an insurance policy. He had run into an old friend at a Ray Charles concert, Billy Preston. Preston was a child prodigy from Texas. Raised on gospel and R&B, he had met the Beatles years earlier in Hamburg when they were a scruffy, leather-clad bar band, and he was a 15-year-old playing organ for Little Richard. Harrison invited Preston to sit in on the sessions. The effect was instantaneous. It is a phenomenon known to anyone who has fought with a sibling. When a guest enters the house, everyone behaves. The Beatles stopped bickering. They sat up straighter. And musically, Preston provided the glue that had been missing.
Good to see you. Nice to see you. All right.
On Get Back, Preston sat at the Fender Rhodes electric piano. He didn't just play along, he defined the song. His solo is a masterpiece of soul, shimmering, percussive, and liquid. It provided a warm, funky counterpoint to the sharp, treble-heavy guitars of Lennon and Harrison.
It's interesting to see how people behave nicely when you bring a guest in. Straight away it just became 100% improvement.
30th of January 1969, the Beatles climbed the stairs to the roof of their Apple Corps headquarters on Savile Row for their final public performance. It was a cold, windy winter afternoon. To the left of the drum kit, huddled in a black leather jacket, sat Billy Preston. He was the only musician to ever share billing on a Beatles single. Get Back was released as The Beatles with Billy Preston. On that roof, amidst the wind and the police threats, Preston's organ swells on Don't Let Me Down, lifting the song from a plea to a prayer. He gave the Beatles the soul they could not generate on their own.
It wasn't until I was with Ray Charles in Europe and George Harrison came to the concert and he recognized me and he sent a note back for me to give him a call. So I called him and they were at the studio. He said, come on down and see the guys. And they were there recording, working on Let It Be. So I came in and they said, hey, what's happening? And so we started jamming and reminiscing old songs. And then John asked me, would I like to stay over and help them finish the album? I said, sure I would, you know. So I stayed over, and during the time we were working on Let It Be, we also did the Abbey Road and the White Album. So I was over in England about 6 months out of the year. And I'd stay at George's house, and it was just fabulous. The guys were just, I mean, it's such a glow when all four of those guys are together. It's just like the room glows, you know. Very exciting.
But Preston's journey didn't end with the Fab Four. In the mid-70s, the Rolling Stones were becoming a global touring behemoth. Their 1975 tour of the Americas was a spectacle of excess. Huge stages, inflatable phalluses, and a band that was often teetering on the edge of collapse. They needed an anchor. They hired Billy Preston. Preston wasn't just a sideman on this tour, he was a co-star. He was given 2 slots in the set list to perform his own songs. Will It Go Round in Circles and Outer Space. He danced across the stage, trading lines with Mick Jagger, playing with a ferocity that forced the Stones to step up their game. Reviews from the time often noted that Preston stole the show. He brought a funk element to the Stones' sound that would permeate their album Black and Blue. Listen to the track Melody. That isn't just a rock band playing the blues, that is a rock band being schooled in jazz and soul by a master. Preston. Preston was also an innovator. In 1972, he released the instrumental track Outer Space. He ran a clavinet, a crisp, percussive keyboard, through a wah-wah pedal, a technique usually reserved for guitars. The sound was alien, funky, and utterly new. He paired it with the ARP synthesizer, taking the machine out of the science lab and putting it onto the dance floor. Billy Preston walked a line that few others could. He was black in a white rock world, gay in a fiercely heterosexual industry, and a gospel believer in a world of hedonism. He was the secret ingredient that two of history's greatest bands used to save themselves. Rock and roll is often a game of confidence. Sometimes you don't need to know how to play the instrument. You just need to act like you do. No one proved this better than Al Kooper. In 1958, a 14-year-old Kooper was playing guitar in a band called the Royal Teens. They had a novelty hit called Short Shorts. It was the kind of disposable pop fluff that defined the pre-Beatles era. Kooper seemed destined to be a footnote in the history of one-hit wonders. But Al Kooper had ambition. And he had nerve. The 15th of June, 1965, Columbia Studios, New York City. Bob Dylan is recording his new album, Highway 61 Revisited. He is attempting to electrify his sound, to marry his surrealist poetry with the aggression of rock and roll. Al Kooper, now 21, has been invited to the session by the producer, Tom Wilson. Kooper is a guitarist. He intends to play on the session. But when he arrives, he sees the legendary blues guitarist Mike Bloomfield unpacking his Telecaster. Kooper hears Bloomfield warm up. He realizes he is hopelessly outclassed. He quietly packs his guitar away and retreats to the control room, pretending to be busy. But Kooper notices something. The organ console, a Hammond B3, is empty. The designated keyboard player, Paul Griffin, has moved over to the piano. Kooper sees his opening. He tells the producer, "I have a great part for the organ." This is a lie. He doesn't have a part. He barely knows how to turn the instrument on. But the producer is distracted, stepping out to take a phone call. Kooper walks into the studio and sits at the organ. The tape begins to roll for a song called Like a Rolling Stone. Because Kooper doesn't know the song, he is terrified of making a mistake. He decides to play tentatively. He waits to hear the chord played by the rest of the band, and then he comes in an eighth of a note later. This hesitation, this delay, creates a lag in the rhythm. It gives the track a laid-back, swelling feel. In the choruses, Kooper gains confidence. He slams his hands down on the chords and presses the volume pedal to the floor. The organ swells, rising like a tide. When they listen to the playback, Dylan's head snaps up. "Turn the organ up," he commands. The producer protests. "That guy's not an organ player," he says. Dylan replies, "I don't care. Turn the organ up." That sound, that swirling, delayed, amateurish organ, became the signature of the most important song in rock history. It was a triumph of feel over technique. Al Kooper had bluffed his way into immortality. Kooper's career became a series of fortunate interventions. In 1968, he found himself in a session with the Rolling Stones for You Can't Always Get What You Want. The song needed grandeur. Kooper played the piano, the organ, and, in a moment of inspired madness, the French horn intro. He wrote the horn arrangement, envisioning a soul revue sound, but the band stripped it back, leaving only his lonely, mournful French horn to open the track. It remains one of the most evocative openings in the Stones canon. In the early 70s, Kooper moved to the American South. He discovered a band of long-haired rockers in a bar in Atlanta. They were called Lynyrd Skynyrd. Kooper produced their debut album, including their massive anthem, Freebird. But the sessions were a battleground. Kooper eventually relented, but he left his own mark on the album. On the credits, a musician named Roosevelt Gook is listed as playing mellotron and backing vocals. Roosevelt Gook was Al Kooper. He was the Zelig of rock, the man who was always there when history was being made, usually because he had invited himself in. If Roger Waters was the brain of Pink Floyd and David Gilmour was the heart, Richard Wright was the atmosphere. He was the air the band breathed. Pink Floyd's music was about space, it was about the void, and Richard Wright knew how to fill that void not with notes but with texture. He understood that in rock music, silence is as loud as noise. 1971. The band is recording the album Medal. They are experimenting, searching for a new sound to escape the shadow of their former leader, Syd Barrett. Richard Wright sits at a grand piano. He plays a single note, a high B. He feeds the signal through a Leslie speaker, a rotating cabinet usually used for organs, and then through a Binson Echo Rec unit. The result is a sound that defies categorization. It is a ping. It sounds like the sonar of a submarine exploring the depths of the ocean. That single note became the opening of Echoes, a 23-minute opus that defined the Pink Floyd sound. It was the sound of isolation, of distance, of the underwater world. Wright didn't need a flurry of notes to capture the listener. He did it with one. 2 years later, during the recording of The Dark Side of the Moon, Wright composed a chord progression he called the Mortality Sequence. It was solemn, jazzy, and complex. The band struggled to find a way to finish it. They didn't want lyrics, they wanted pure emotion. They brought in a session singer named Claire Torrey. She was embarrassed and unsure of what to do. Wright played her the chords. "Think about death," they told her. "Think about horror." Wright sat at the piano and played the progression, a steady rhythmic pulse of G minor and C ninth. He provided the safety net. Over this foundation, Torrey began to scream. She wailed, improvised, and poured out a guttural cry of grief. The song became The Great Gig in the Sky. Wright's playing is the unsung hero of the track. He holds the harmonic structure together, allowing the vocal to fly into the stratosphere without losing its way. But Wright's story has a bitter sting. By 1979, the relationship between Wright and Roger Waters had become toxic. During the recording of The Wall, Waters, driven by ego and control, bullied Wright into submission. He claimed Wright wasn't contributing enough. He fired him from the band. However, the tour for The Wall was looming. It was a massive theatrical undertaking. The band needed a keyboard player who knew the songs. So they hired Richard Wright back, but not as a member, but as a salaried musician. The tour was a financial disaster. The costs of building the massive wall on stage every night were astronomical. The band lost millions. Roger Waters lost money. David Gilmour lost money. Nick Mason lost money. But Richard Wright, he got a paycheck every week. Because he was a hired hand, he was the only member of Pink Floyd to make a profit from the original Wall tour. It was a grim victory, but a victory nonetheless. After Wright died in 2008, David Gilmour admitted that Wright's contribution had been undervalued for decades. He called him the glue of the band.
I'm going to dedicate this, if you don't mind, to my old friend and colleague Richard Wright, who died a couple of weeks ago.
Wright's voice, blending with Gilmour's in harmony, and his jazz-inflected chords gave Pink Floyd a warmth that balanced the cold cynicism of Waters' lyrics. He was the human element in a band obsessed with alienation. History is written by the victors, and in rock and roll, the victors are usually the ones standing at the front of the stage holding the microphone. We build statues to the singers and the guitarists. We canonize the egos and the excesses, but the sound we love, the sound that still resonates from car radios and turntables 50 years later, was not built by egos alone. It was built by the delicate touch of a sick man from Perivale. It was built by the stubborn refusal of a Scottish blues purist. It was built by the joy of a gospel prodigy, the audacity of a New York hustler, and the atmospheric genius of a quiet texturalist. Nicky Hopkins, Ian Stewart, Billy Preston, Al Kooper, Richard Wright. They were the unsung heroes. They didn't just play the keys, they unlocked the songs. And without them, the music would have been silence. David Gilmour has said that Richard Wright was undervalued for many years. Since Wright's death, he even refuses to sing songs that Wright also sang on, saying it's not the same without him. When Gilmour named his 4 favourite Pink Floyd songs, did he list any that Wright sang on? To find out, click the thumbnail on screen.